August 14th, 1827. The night air over the Carolina marshes sat like a wet blanket. Lantern light trembled against the glass of a plantation library. On a polished mahogany desk, blood had been flung like paint. Bone fragments lay embedded 6 feet away. The scene made men who saw it go pale. The only living figure who could have done it was a man named Elias Drummond, 6'8", broad-shouldered, and built from work that carved muscle into stone. He was property on paper and a colossus in practice, a man who had been exhibited and broken and then expected to keep working as if nothing had happened. That night, Elias walked into a house where a plantation owner sat counting money and left the room with a secret that would not fit neatly on a ledger. He vanished into the swamps and left behind a question that would echo for generations. What becomes of a man pushed past every limit? This is the story of that limit. This is the story of the giant of Marsh Bend and the night the fields went quiet. If your skin is already crawling, subscribe now. This channel digs up the stories history tried to bury. We tell the voices that archives almost erased, the men who were more than a line in a ledger. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Charleston, Savannah, somewhere far from these marshes. I read every single one. Stick around. The next chapters pull you deeper into the swamp, and trust me, you'll want to hear what comes next. The sun bled into the horizon like fire spilled across the water, and the docks of Charleston buzzed with voices, laughter, and the shuffle of boots. Men gathered for the auction, sweat, tobacco, and money in the air. Elias Drummond stood at the edge of the crowd, chained but unflinching. He towered over everyone, his shadow stretching long across the planks, a mountain among men, silent, his expression unreadable as coins clinked and bids began. The auctioneer, a loud man with polished boots, bellowed over the din, his voice cracking through the humidity. He gestured toward Elias as if displaying a beast for sale, calling him the strongest worker in the Carolinas. Bidders murmured. Some looked in awe, others with calculation. They saw strength, not a man. They saw labor, not breath. Elias's gaze drifted upward toward the gulls circling above, free, loud, unreachable. A faint wind brushed his face. Then came Josiah Crane. Wealthy, proud, his white coat immaculate. He approached the stage with deliberate steps, examining Elias like a craftsman inspecting a prized tool. He smiled thinly, eyes glittering with cold satisfaction. 600, Crane said flatly. The crowd stirred. Someone countered, 8. Voices rose, the price climbing like a fever until Crane's voice cut through again, calm, certain. 1300. The hammer fell. Silence followed. The chains stayed on. Elias didn't move as Crane signed the paper. He had been sold before. Different faces, same story. He learned that silence was armor. Words only invited pain. He breathed slow, waiting. Crane approached him, hand gripping his shoulder. "You'll earn every cent of that," he said, his tone sharp as glass. Elias met his gaze once. He didn't nod. He simply stared until Crane stepped back. They loaded him onto a wagon bound for Marsh Bend, a plantation carved into the edge of the swamp. The road stretched endlessly, cicadas humming, the air thick enough to drink. Elias watched trees bend under wind like men under orders. The plantation appeared out of the mist by dusk. 2 stories of white columns and iron balconies, polished and proud, while beyond it stretched fields flooded waist-deep in brown water. The sound of frogs never stopped. Crane dismounted, barking orders. Overseers moved like vultures, thin, hard-eyed, each carrying a whip or stick. Elias was led past rows of cabins, rough wood and cracked doors, the smell of smoke and sweat inside every wall. His cabin was smaller than he expected. Inside, a straw mat, a rusted bucket, and a single small window that showed the fields shimmering under moonlight. Elias sat on the floor. The wood creaked beneath him. That night, Crane held a dinner for his neighbors. The men gathered in the main house, voices rising with laughter and bourbon. "Wait till you see him," Crane boasted. "The man's a marvel, built like Goliath himself." They called him in. He entered the parlor barefoot, ducking beneath the doorway. The room fell silent. Even laughter died when they saw his height. Crane grinned. "Show them your hands," he ordered. Elias raised his hands slowly, massive, scarred, capable of crushing bone or bending iron. The guests whispered, one of them stepping forward to compare his hand against Elias's palm. It vanished inside it. Laughter returned, uneasy, forced. "Lift that chest," Crane said, pointing toward a heavy crate. Elias obeyed, hefting it with one arm. The men clapped and whistled. Crane smiled wide, his pride glowing in the firelight. "Worth every dollar." Later, when the guests left, Crane stood in the doorway, brandy in hand. "You'll make me rich, Elias," he said softly. Elias didn't answer. He turned his head toward the dark fields, the swamp beyond them whispering. Weeks turned into months. Elias worked from dawn until the stars returned, hauling timber, building levees, lifting what others couldn't. His strength was endless, but Crane's orders never ceased. Sweat soaked his clothes until they clung like chains. The overseer, a thin man named Porter, watched him constantly. "Freak strength," he muttered once. Elias heard it but said nothing. He didn't fight. He didn't break. He moved like a tide, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. At night, the men gathered outside their cabins, sharing stories in low tones. Elias sat apart, quiet, sharpening a piece of wood into a dull point. When one asked him where he came from, he simply said, "North." Crane began showing him to visitors, planters, merchants, even soldiers. They came to see the giant of Marshbend, as he was now called. They marveled, whispered, and left behind coins. Elias stood silent through it all. Sometimes, he imagined walking into the swamp and never returning. The thought came and went like thunder behind clouds, distant, heavy, waiting. He wondered how far a man could walk before he disappeared completely. One evening, Crane ordered him to move a water gate alone. It took 6 men to do it normally. Elias braced his feet, hands gripping the wooden beam slick with algae, muscles coiling like rope under strain. He lifted. The wood groaned, water rushing through the opened gate, splashing against his legs. The men watching gasped. Crane laughed. "See that? He's worth 10 of you." Elias dropped the beam. The laughter died. The night smelled of mud and smoke. Elias sat outside his cabin, hands bleeding from splinters. He looked toward the main house, the windows glowing warm and golden. Behind those lights, Crane drank and laughed again. He remembered a man once, his father maybe, telling him strength meant nothing without peace. The words came back now like an echo from another life, one he could no longer touch. The thought hurt more than labor. Days blurred together. Every sunrise was the same. But inside something changed, quietly, invisibly. The laughter no longer stung. The commands no longer frightened. They only bored holes in the silence until something else began to grow. Elias started speaking to others in the fields. Short words, steady tone. He helped an old man lift a broken cart, carried another through mud. The overseer didn't like it, said he was stirring unrest. Crane laughed it off, but power breeds fear, and Crane's laughter was thinning. He saw something in Elias's eyes, calm, unflinching, and colder than before. He began to realize he hadn't bought obedience. He'd purchased patience, and patience has limits. One night, Crane visited the cabins unannounced. He stood at Elias's door, lantern in hand. "You're special," he said, voice almost kind. "Don't forget who you belong to." Elias didn't move. "I remember," he replied. Crane smiled, satisfied, and turned to leave. Behind him, Elias's shadow stretched long across the dirt, silent, massive, unmoving. The swamp wind rose, carrying the sound of frogs and something else, a low rumble that almost sounded human. The next morning, the men whispered of a storm coming, not in the sky, but in the fields. Elias didn't speak. He simply looked out over the water, his reflection rippling like something waiting to break. He had been sold, displayed, and worked until his body became legend. But inside that legend was a man, tired of being measured only by what he could carry. The ground beneath Marshbend was starting to shake, and somewhere, deep in his chest, a quiet promise formed. Not of escape, not of revenge, but of ending. Because every man, no matter how strong, has one final act left in him when all else is taken. The cicadas screamed louder that night. Crane slept soundly in his house, unaware that the giant outside had stopped being a tool and started becoming a storm. The swamp waited, listening. It would not wait long. The dawn came red over Marshbend, painting the flooded fields like open wounds. Elias rose before the horn, his body sore, his hands raw. The work waited. It always did. Patient, endless, cruel. He stepped into the water, the mud sucking at his feet. The air buzzed with mosquitoes thick enough to taste. Beside him, other men bent their backs to the rice stalks, silent except for breathing and the sound of blades. The overseer, Porter, rode the dike with his whip coiled like a serpent. His voice cut through the mist, cold and sharp. "Faster, you oxen!" he shouted. The men kept moving. No one answered. Elias moved slowly, rhythm steady, water up to his knees. He felt the sun clawing up his neck, heat rising with each passing hour. Time disappeared in the blur of labor and breath and pain. By noon, Crane arrived on horseback, his white shirt glowing against the green fields. He carried a glass of brandy like a king surveying his land. His gaze found Elias, and the smile that followed wasn't joy, it was ownership. He dismounted, boots sinking into mud, and called out, "You, giant, over here!" Elias obeyed. He didn't hurry, didn't speak. The other men paused their work just long enough to watch before lowering their eyes again. Crane examined him the way a man inspects a prized animal, circling, nodding, satisfied. "You'll lead the West Gate crew," he said. "If it fails, the loss comes out of your hide." Elias nodded once. The order was law. As Crane walked away, Porter muttered, "See what happens when the master likes you too much." His tone dripped with hate, envy, something darker. Elias said nothing. He simply turned back to the water. That night, the air hung heavy with rain that never came. Elias sat outside his cabin, watching lightning crawl silently through the clouds. The others huddled near the fire, talking low. He listened without joining. One of the younger men, Jonah, whispered, "He doesn't fear them." Another replied, "That's why they'll break him." The fire popped. Elias stood and walked away before their words became prophecy. In the darkness, the swamp seemed alive, frogs croaking, branches moving though no wind blew. Elias stared out into it, listening to the hum of insects and the faint, steady throb of his own pulse. The next morning, the West Gate jammed under the weight of the tide. Water poured over, flooding the lower fields. Porter arrived, screaming, whip raised. "Who left it closed?" he demanded. Men pointed toward Elias. Elias stepped forward, hands open. "I closed it last," he said quietly. "The storm last night forced it shut." Porter's eyes narrowed. "You think I asked for weather reports?" He struck. The whip cracked. The pain barely registered. Elias stood firm, his jaw tightening, his eyes locked on Porter. The overseer struck again. The sound echoed across the fields like thunder. Men stopped working. Silence spread like fire. Porter froze. He had seen defiance before, but not this kind. not silent, calm defiance that dared him to strike again. For a moment, the overseer saw himself reflected in Elias's stare and stepped back. Later that day, Crane heard of it. He summoned both men to the house. The parlor was cool, filled with polished wood and the scent of cigars. Crane leaned against his desk, swirling a drink lazily. "Porter says you refused punishment," he began. Elias's voice came slow, steady. "No refusal." I stood still. Crane smiled thinly. Stillness can be rebellion if the wrong man sees it that way. His tone carried warning. He circled Elias the way a shark circles bleeding prey. "You're strong, Drummond, but strength without obedience is a threat, and threats have short lives here." He paused, sipping brandy. "Do we understand each other?" Elias nodded once. "We do." Crane's smile didn't reach his eyes. He motioned toward Porter. "Leave us." The overseer hesitated, then obeyed. The door shut, leaving only the creak of the wood beneath their feet. Crane's voice softened. "You remind me of someone I once knew. A man who thought silence made him free." He poured another drink, handing it to Elias. "He learned otherwise." Elias didn't take it. That small refusal hung in the air longer than any word could. Crane's smirk faded. He placed the glass down slowly. "Get out," he said finally, voice tight. Elias left without bowing, his footsteps loud against the floor. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. The first drops of rain fell heavy on his shoulders as he crossed the yard. By nightfall, the storm came in full, wind, rain, and the endless rush of water. Elias didn't sleep. The roof leaked in 3 places. He sat awake, watching the rain pour down like the world itself was being washed clean. For a moment, he almost believed it could. Morning brought no peace. The fields were flooded waist deep, the rice drowned. Crane raged at his overseers, voice carrying across the yard. "Do you understand what this cost me?" he shouted. The men stood silent. He turned to Elias. "You were supposed to guard the gates," Elias answered evenly. "They broke under pressure." Crane's face went red. "Everything breaks under pressure," he said, stepping close. "Especially men who forget who they are." The confrontation ended with silence. Elias turned and walked back to the flooded fields without another word. The others watched him go. Something had changed. Something in the air had cracked. That evening, he repaired the gates alone, shoulders straining under soaked timber. His breath came harsh, his hands bleeding. By the time the tide receded, his shirt clung dark with blood and mud. When he returned, Porter waited by the cabins, arms crossed. "You think you're special?" he asked. Elias looked past him. "No." Porter sneered. "Then stop acting like it." He swung his cane. Elias caught it mid-air. Their eyes met, Porter's wild, Elias's calm. For a long second, nothing moved. Then Elias let go, turned, and entered his cabin. Behind him, Porter stood shaking, realizing that he had just touched a line no man could cross. The rumor spread fast. By sunrise, every man in the fields had heard. The giant had caught the whip in mid-air and didn't flinch. Some said it was bravery. Others whispered it was suicide. Crane heard by noon. He didn't punish Elias. He didn't even mention it. But that night, he didn't drink. He sat in his library, the sound of rain against the window, his hands trembling faintly. Days passed. The silence between master and servant became a storm neither spoke of. Elias worked harder than ever. The men followed his rhythm now, steady, quiet, unbreakable. Even Porter stopped shouting. Fear had found him. One afternoon, Crane called Elias again. "You'll accompany me to Charleston tomorrow," he said. "I've arranged a demonstration. They want to see the strength I've invested in." Elias said nothing. His pulse hammered like thunder. That night, by the dim light of the moon, Elias carved something small from wood, a token no bigger than a hand. He didn't smile. He didn't sleep. Outside, the frogs called his name. When morning came, the wagon was ready. Crane stood waiting in his white coat, smug as ever. Elias climbed aboard, the fields stretching behind him like an ocean of ghosts. The road ahead was long. As they rolled toward Charleston, the world felt heavy with meaning, every sound, every breeze whispering a single truth. Chains can hold a man's body, but never his choice of when to break them. Somewhere in that endless stretch of road, Elias decided something he'd never spoken aloud. He would not be shown again, not as an animal, not as property. The storm that waited in him was almost ready. The road back from Charleston was long and silent. Elias sat beside Crane on the wagon, the horses' hooves thudding like heartbeats against the dirt. Behind them, the city lights faded into storm clouds. Crane hummed softly, proud of the evening spectacle. The gathering of planters had been his triumph, his giant, lifting weights before gasping men. Elias had done it all without expression. His silence had unsettled everyone. As night thickened, the road turned slick. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, the world shrinking to the glow of one flickering lantern. Crane cursed, pulling his coat tight. Elias didn't move, didn't speak. When they reached Marshbend, the house glowed faintly through the storm. The swamp around it hissed and swelled, frogs croaking like warning drums. Elias jumped down, his body aching from days without rest. Inside, Crane called for brandy. His laughter carried through the hall, sharp and slurred. "You're famous now," he said, waving his glass. "They said you were like Samson. Imagine that, Samson with a price tag." Elias stood in the doorway, drenched, silent. Crane continued, pacing. "Do you know what they offered me tonight? 2,000. 2,000 for you." He turned, smiling cruelly. "I told them you weren't for sale." His words were meant as pride, but they landed like chains. Elias stared at the floorboards, water dripping from his hair, his chest rising slow. "Not for sale," he repeated quietly. "Owned." Crane laughed, missing the meaning. "Yes, owned, and worth every cent." He clapped him on the shoulder, too hard, too familiar. The gesture felt wrong. It lingered. Elias's eyes lifted, something cold and final behind them. The rain intensified outside, wind rattling shutters. The house creaked under the pressure. Crane poured another drink, his tone turning bitter. "You should be grateful. Most men in your place wouldn't live half as well." Elias didn't reply. Gratitude was a word that had lost all shape. He turned and walked toward the door, but Crane's voice stopped him. "I didn't say you could leave." Silence stretched thin as glass. Elias turned slowly, his shadow filling the room. Crane met his eyes for the first time without certainty. Something vast and wordless passed between them, one man drunk on power, the other done pretending. Crane set his glass down carefully. "Don't mistake patience for weakness," he said. Elias's answer came soft as thunder. "And don't mistake silence for peace." The wind howled. The lamp flickered. The room seemed to shrink. Crane stepped closer, face flushed. "You forget yourself," he spat. "You belong here." His voice cracked, not from rage, but from fear. Elias said nothing, his breath slow, his fists tightening at his sides. A loud crash outside broke the tension, a gate slamming open in the storm. Crane turned to the window. "Damn that flood," he muttered. "Fix it before the field's lost." Elias didn't move. "Now!" Crane barked. Elias walked past him, slow, deliberate, toward the door. Each step echoed against the floorboards like a drumbeat. The rain swallowed him as he stepped outside, vanishing into the black wind. The storm hit hard. Trees bent under its fury. Elias trudged toward the gate, mud sucking at his feet, water rising to his knees. He reached the wooden frame, lightning illuminating the field like daylight. He gripped the gate beam, forcing it closed against the rushing tide. The water pressed like a living thing, roaring, shoving, fighting him. His muscles burned, tendons screaming, until finally the gate slammed shut. When he turned, Crane stood behind him, soaked, furious, shouting over the storm. "You'll ruin everything! You don't think, you just move!" Elias stared at him through the rain, chest heaving, eyes unreadable. Crane stepped closer, finger raised, voice sharp. "You hear me? You'll answer when I speak." The words sliced through the storm, echoing louder than thunder. Something inside Elias snapped, silent, invisible, irreversible. He reached out and caught Crane's wrist mid-swing. The smaller man froze, shock flashing across his face. Elias's grip tightened. The rain fell harder, masking the sound of bones shifting under pressure. Crane shouted, a sound more of disbelief than pain. "Let go!" But Elias didn't, not yet. For the first time, he spoke clearly, every word heavy as stone. "You've had enough of my silence." Lightning tore across the sky. The world went white for a breathless second. Then came the sound, short, wet, final. The gate creaked under the wind, and Crane's body fell into the mud with a dull thud. Elias stood still, rain pouring down his face. He looked at the broken form before him, not with triumph, not with horror, but with the hollow calm of a man who had reached the end of endurance. Behind him, the storm began to ease. The wind slowed. The frogs returned, croaking steadily. Elias dropped to his knees, hands pressed into the soaked earth, breathing hard, rainwater and tears mixing on his face. He stayed like that for minutes, maybe hours. When he finally rose, dawn was bleeding through the clouds. The world smelled of wet soil and something like freedom. He looked at the swamp beyond the fields. He walked toward it without turning back. His clothes clung to him, heavy and cold. Each step sank deep into mud, each breath drawing him further from the house that had owned his body for years. Behind him, the plantation was waking, men shouting, dogs barking, the alarm spreading. Porter's voice cut through the chaos. "He's gone! Crane's dead!" The fields erupted into panic, but the swamp swallowed every sound. Elias moved deeper into the mist. The air turned cooler, the light dimmer. Cypress trees rose like towers, roots twisting through water black as ink. He waited until his legs ached, then kept going. The first search party came by noon. They found only prints leading to the swamp's edge and nothing beyond. "No one survives in there," Porter said. "He's dead already." But his voice carried doubt. For days they searched, boats through reeds, dogs sniffing air heavy with decay. They found nothing, no body, no sign, just silence, broken by the endless croak of frogs and the slow drift of mist. Weeks passed. The legend grew faster than the truth. Some said Elias drowned. Others swore they'd seen a giant shape moving through the fog. Even Porter started avoiding the water after dark. Crane was buried without ceremony. The plantation changed hands quietly. His death was called an accident, a gate collapse, a freak storm. The papers printed 3 lines. The name Elias Drummond appeared in none. But in the cabins, the story lived. Men whispered it by firelight. The giant who refused to bow, who broke his chains and vanished. Some said he walked north. Others said the swamp itself took him in. Every night when thunder rolled over Marsh Bend, the old men swore they saw a shadow moving at the edge of the trees, tall, still, watching. They said the swamp had chosen its own guardian. Years later, a traveler passing through claimed he met a man deep in the bayou, massive, silent, with hands like stone and eyes that carried storms. He offered no name, only a warning. "Don't go back there." No one believed him. But when he returned north, his stories spread through taverns, through docks, through towns. A whisper of a man too strong to kill, too proud to kneel, too tired to hate. And when the rain fell hardest, old workers of Marshbend said they could hear it still, the sound of the gate slamming shut, the final defiance of a man who decided his own ending. In that swamp, where the earth remembers pain and the water hides ghosts, the legend of Elias Drummond became more than a story. It became a warning to every man who thought chains could last forever, because on that breaking night, strength found its voice, and silence became thunder. And though no one ever saw him again, the world still trembled at the memory of the giant who walked away. The morning after the storm, the sun rose weak and uncertain. Mist clung to the ground like a shroud. Marshbend stood silent, the great house cracked open by rain and rumor. Josiah Crane's body was gone by noon, buried quickly, quietly. No ceremony, no sermon, only a wooden cross driven into mud and a silence that no man dared break. Porter took command until new ownership arrived. He ordered search parties through the swamp, shouting orders like they meant something. But each man who entered the trees returned pale and shaking. The swamp was endless, they said. Voices whispered in the reeds. Footsteps followed them, though no one walked behind. Something in there breathed, slow, heavy, patient. By dusk, no one volunteered. Porter stopped asking. He drank instead, sitting on the porch with a rifle across his knees. Every sound made him flinch. Every shadow looked too tall. The fields grew wild within weeks. The gates stayed open, water spilling where it wanted. The land no longer obeyed. It was as if Elias Drummond had taken the order of the place with him. Rumors thickened faster than the mist. Some said Elias had drowned, dragged down by the swamp itself. Others swore they saw him standing in the marsh at night, waiting, still as a ghost. By the third month, travelers refused to stay near Marshbend after dark. They claimed to hear slow footsteps through the fog, heavy, deliberate, echoing far too long to belong to any living man. Porter lasted until winter. One night, he followed the sound of chains rattling by the water. They found his hat in the morning. His body never surfaced. The men whispered that the swamp had judged him. Years passed. The plantation rotted. Ivy crawled up the walls. The windows shattered one by one. Nature swallowed Marshbend whole, as if the land itself wanted to erase every trace of what had happened. Then came 1834. A hunter named Samuel Briggs wandered into the old property chasing a wounded boar. He never found the animal. Instead, he found prints, massive, barefoot, leading straight into the marsh. Briggs followed them for an hour before losing the trail. But later that night, while camping near the bayou, he saw a shape moving through the fog, tall, broad, silent. He swore it turned to look at him. The hunter told his story in a tavern back in Charleston. Laughter met his words. Men called him drunk, but when he showed them the plaster cast of the footprint, the laughter died quick. The print was massive, 18 inches long, deep enough to fill with rainwater. The newspapers called it a hoax, but the legend had already returned, stronger than before. They called him the Marshbend Phantom, a giant who walked the swamps at night, punishing the cruel and protecting the lost. His name was whispered like prayer and curse all at once. Sailors passing the coast claimed to see lights deep in the wetlands. Hunters heard heavy breathing behind them before their prey vanished. No man ever found proof. No man ever stopped looking. By 1840, the swamp had become a no man's land. Locals built roads around it. Maps labeled it uninhabitable. But every now and then, a traveler swore he saw a figure watching from the trees. A preacher once ventured in, saying he wanted to bring peace to the haunted land. He was never seen again. The men who searched for him found his Bible, open to the book of Exodus. As decades passed, the story changed shape but never died. Children in Charleston were warned, "Behave, or the marsh giant will come for you." Adults told the tale in whispers by firelight. But in the cabins of the old fields, men told it differently. They said Elias Drummond hadn't died. He'd become something else, something too big for this world to hold in chains again. In 1865, soldiers passing through the ruins of Marsh Bend camped by the water. One of them, Corporal Isaac Moore, wrote in his journal that he'd seen a man of monstrous size watching from the cypress. He fired a warning shot. The figure didn't move. Then, as lightning flashed, it was simply gone. The next morning, the corporal found footprints along the bank leading nowhere, disappearing into still water. Historians dismissed it as superstition, but the journal remained, its pages brittle and stained with swamp mold. The handwriting trembled as it described eyes that burned like grief. By the turn of the century, the story had spread across states. Writers turned Elias into myth, a ghost of vengeance, a spirit of justice. But those who lived near the marsh never used the word ghost. To them, he was a man who walked away and kept walking, a man too strong for graves, too silent for heaven, too proud for hell, a man who chose the swamp as his exile. Every so often, strange things surfaced, half-buried huts deep in the reeds, tools carved by massive hands, footprints renewed after rain. The swamp seemed to breathe his memory, never fading, never forgiving. An old fisherman named Carter once swore Elias saved his life. His boat overturned during a storm. As he sank, a massive arm pulled him to shore. When he awoke, there were footprints beside him. No one believed him. But Carter stopped fishing after that. He moved inland, saying only, "The swamp ain't empty." His eyes stayed haunted until the day he died. In 1904, a hurricane tore through the Carolinas, drowning half the coast. Marsh Bend vanished completely beneath the flood. When the water receded, the plantation was gone, replaced by a shallow, endless lake. Yet people still swore they saw something moving beneath that water when the moon was full, a shape that disturbed the stillness, tall, dark, unbroken. Always alone, always watching. By 1950, locals renamed the area Drummond's Hollow. No official map carried the name, but everyone who lived near it knew. They left offerings on the shore, coins, bread, even old tools. They said it kept the floods away. They said the giant still walked under the surface, holding the gates closed, keeping the water in check. The chain breaker had become the protector. Modern explorers visited in the 1980s, filming documentaries. None stayed more than a night. One recording captured heavy footsteps at 3 a.m. Too slow, too deliberate to be animal. The tape ended in static. Today, the swamp remains untouched. Trees rise from still water, draped in moss like funeral veils. The air hums with insects, the silence beneath them older than memory. The ground feels alive. And sometimes, when the fog rolls thick over Drummond's Hollow, men swear they see a shadow moving just beyond sight, massive, silent, neither ghost nor man, but something made of both. Because legends never die when they're built on truth. Elias Drummond didn't vanish. He became what every man dreams of when cornered by cruelty, free, untouchable, eternal. The swamp still breathes his name with every gust of wind, every ripple of water. Not as a monster, not as a ghost, but as the memory of a man who refused to kneel, and on nights when the rain hammers the earth, when thunder shakes the world, you can almost hear it, the creak of a wooden gate closing, and the deep, steady breath of the man who vanished.